Do you need this on money? Hi everybody, welcome to our first Path to Enlightenment class for term 3. And sorry about my odd seating setup. It's the ninth example of suffering a running injury that takes a long time and a lot of osteo fees to get out of. So I can't sit on the ground at the moment. Okay, so we'll begin with a couple of light offerings. So the first one has been sponsored by Chris and Christine, and it's a light offering for the Tibetan Buddhist Society student Chris Jeffries, who came to the centre for many years, and who very tragically died unexpectedly yesterday from a heart attack. And the offering is made with the prayer that Chris has a very high rebirth, good conditions to meet a holy teacher, and that he's able to continue with the study of Dharma and quickly reach enlightenment. And also we have a light offering sponsored from the Tibetan Buddhist Society for our dear Dharma sister Diane, who's currently in hospital, and also offered with the prayer that she quickly returns to good health, experiences all good conditions, and is always held in the compassion and care of her teachers, of all Buddhas, Bodhisattvas and holy beings. And so we can reflect on those two offerings for Chris Jeffries and for Diane for a short time. Okay, so we'll do the prayers as usual, starting off with the prayer of praise to Shakimini Buddha, which we'll do in Tibetan and English. Tempa chandende dejin shepa, drachampa yangtapa tsope sanje, repa dang shapsu tempa, dewa shepa jiten chempa, chebu doe kalo jua, lana mepa ladang menam chidamba, Sanje Chandende Peljawa Shakya Tupala Shasaru Charu Chapsu Chiu. Teacher, Bhagawan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfectly pure and complete Buddha, all-knowing, having poise, Sugata, apprehender of the world, navigator of beings to be subdued, incomparable, teacher of gods and humans, to the Buddhas, the Bhagawan, the glorious conqueror Shakimuni, we prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. And the refuge and Bodhichitta prayer again in both Tibetan and English. Sangyecho dang tso chi chok nam la jang cho ba du da nye cha su chi da ge jen so je pe so nam ji do la pen chi sangye do pa shu. To the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I go for refuge until becoming enlightened. Through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. To the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I go for refuge until becoming enlightened. Through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. And the short mandala offering. O Saje Pache Chogjem Metotram Rea Lengeniere Jenpari Sangye Jendomente Oari Drogan Nam Dajela Chupashu. This ground anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, Mount Meru, the 4 continents, adorned with sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered thus, may all beings enjoy such pure lands. Next, the 7-limbed prayer. I prostrate my 3 doors with a mind of respect and offer all actually arranged and mentally emanated offerings. I reveal all the downfalls and negativities that I have ever collected and rejoice in the virtues of individuals and superiors. Please remain perfectly abiding until samsara is no longer seen. I request you to turn the vast and profound wheels of Dharma. I dedicate the virtues of myself and others to the great enlightenment. The prayer of lineage of gurus, which again we'll do in Tibetan and English. Punsok jelek jeve trompeku, taye drove rewa kongvesu, malo sheja jeshen sekpetu, shache zo de la gochasa, tame tampa de ye se chicho, jelve sepa kunchi kono, Rame shendo trope namro, me pam jampe yangla shamsa, shindo papa kawa javeyo, jishin gongpa trelse zanle, lodro tome chene sasona, yang sodrape jabla dagcha. Jingda Jambo Nile Jupe Zamutawa Jachen Chupe Mano Yangsu Zupe Nedupe Dampe Zin Mame Zelad Dojo Kunji Lamji Nezupe Jijin Zigshin Seve Domse Jalve Damjo Malu Zinpai Lo Sandra Be Pela Shasa Roshan Sunra Kunla Tavemi Kauzang Tapa Chope Jung Seve Chope Tauke Zapai Sauze Jenyan Namla Bucha. Body born from a million magnificent, excellent virtues, speech fulfilling the hopes of infinite beings, a mind that sees all objects of knowledge precisely. I bow my head to the chief among the Shakyas, supreme sons of the incomparable teacher, carrying the load of all the conqueror's deeds by their emanations appearing in countless realms. I prostrate to Maitreya and Manjushri. The mother of conquerors is difficult to fathom. The precise thought is in commentaries written by Jambuvipa's ornaments, Nagarjuna and Asanga. I prostrate at the feet of those most renowned in the three realms. From these two great chariots come the excellent lineages of the paths of profound view and vast deeds, their essential points gathered thoroughly and without fault. Prostration to the lamp holding this treasury of instruction, giving explanation through compassion, by seeing precisely and completely the essential points of all paths of Sutra and Tantra, holder of the conqueror's entire holy Dharma, prostration to the glorious Losangrapa. I, seeing all the infinite teachings, supreme way of crossing for those entering the journey of liberation, moved by compassion to deeds skilled in method, prostrations to the spiritual master who make everything clear. And a great treasure of excellence in English only, and recalling as we recite it with mindfulness that this prayer covers each step of the whole of the path to enlightenment. So if we are mindful, then effectively we're doing a meditation, a short meditation on the whole sequence of the teachings of the path to enlightenment. The kind master is the basis of all qualities, and proper alliance is the root of the path. By seeing his excellence and through much striving, bestow blessings to be devoted with great respect. This gentle support of freedom, obtained this one time, is most difficult to achieve. Knowing its great value gives rise to a mind seizing its essence constantly, day and night. Bestow blessings to generate this continuum unceasingly. It is like a bubble in water, this constantly moving body and life. Thus remember the swift claps of death. Beyond death, like body and shadow, white and black karmic results follow after. By gaining firm certainty in this, the mass of faults, subtle and very subtle, are abandoned, and the accomplishment of all virtuous collections completed. Bestow blessings to ever retain conscientiousness. The qualities of samsara are unfit to be trusted. The door to all suffering. Do not be content with these enjoyments. By knowing its defects, bestow blessings to develop a great aspiration for the bliss of liberation. By that pure thought, great conscientiousness is drawn forth, and mindfulness and awareness of the individual liberation, the root of the teachings. Bestow blessings to make this the essential practice. Just as I myself have fallen into samsara's ocean, all living beings as mother are also like that. By seeing the responsibility for the liberation of beings, bestow blessings to be trained in supreme bodhicitta. However, by merely generating the mind, if not acquainted with the three aspects of ethics, enlightenment will not be attained. By seeing this excellence, bestow blessings to strain with strong effort in the vows of conqueror sons. Pacifying distraction toward perverse objects by way of proper analysis of the perfect meaning, bestow blessings to swiftly and continuously generate the path related to the union of calm abiding and special insight. Thus becoming a vessel trained in the common paths, enter the Vajrayana, supreme evolution of all vehicles. Bestow blessings to engage the easy path itself, that sacred way of crossing for fortunate beings. The base of practice for the two aspects of attainment is when guarding the pure vows of commitment is found to be genuine and certain. Bestow blessings to protect them even at risk of love. Then, by understanding properly the important points, which are the essence of the two stages of the Tantra classes, bestow blessings to practice according to these holy teachings, with continuous effort in the supreme four-session yoga. Like that, may the spiritual friend revealing the gentle path and the friends of proper practice stand firm, bestow blessings to quickly pacify the masses of outer and inner hindrances. In all rebirths may I never be parted from perfect gurus in the enjoyment of the glorious Dharma. By utterly completing all qualities, paths and grounds, may I quickly achieve the state of Vajradhara. So I thought today we do a meditation on Shakimini Buddha combined with the practice of the four opponent powers. The four opponent powers being the special meditation method that we can use to purify negative karma within our continuum. So first begin by checking our physical meditation posture, making sure that our back is straight but comfortable. Hands resting in the lap, right hand in the left palm. Mouth, jaw and tongue relaxed. Our head slightly tilted forward. If it's comfortable, with our eyes half open and half closed. With our arms extended out slightly from the body at the elbow. Then, having set the physical posture, the meditation, we also set our mental motivation. Reflecting that because our mind is a continuum, each moment of mind linking to the next, shaping it, colouring it, there will definitely be some result of our meditation practice. Will definitely influence our own future mental continuum in some way. So there's no limit to the aspirations we can have for our future mental continuum. And if we set that aspiration, this meditation session can be a cause for that result. What's the best, most positive future we could conceive of for our own mind, our own self? Not only that we bring more peace, clarity into our lives, not only that we are a positive and constructive influence on those around us, much more extensive than that, we completely eliminate any self-cherishing mind from our continuum, and therefore remove any possibility of the negative minds that arise from self-cherishing, such as our anger, our selfish grasping, our big ego, so forth. And by eliminating those, we eliminate any experience of suffering, any possibility of experiencing suffering. But we can aspire to something even more positive than that. Not only is this session the cause of eliminating all of our suffering and cause of suffering, setting the seed of unbelievable happiness for ourselves, but it's also the seed for our own enlightenment, the fulfillment of our own Buddha potential. Through this, bringing inconceivable benefit to every other living being. Aspiration like that. This session can serve as a seed for the enlightenment of all. And visualize in the space in front of us, about the level of our forehead. From emptiness arises a precious throne. In appearance, a precious throne. In nature, the wisdom truth body of Shakimini Buddha. On top of this throne, from emptiness, arises a white syllable Pam, P-A-M, that instantly transforms into a beautiful white lotus flower, symbolizing the mind of renunciation, the mind that turns away from suffering and its causes. On top of the lotus arises a white syllable R, A-H. This immediately transforms into a flat moon disk, symbolizing the mind of enlightenment, Bodhichitta. The aspiration based on great love and great compassion. To liberate every living being from psychic existence by the attainment of enlightenment. And on top of the moon, from emptiness arises a radiant, golden, flat sun disk mandala, symbolizing the realization of wisdom. On top of these three cushions of lotus, moon and sun, from emptiness arises Shakimini Buddha. If we have a guru, we can feel in nature, this is my kind root guru, appearing in the aspect of Shakimini Buddha. Or otherwise, we can just feel this is Shakimini Buddha appearing before us. He has one face, symbolizing that Shakimuni Buddha perceives the one single nature of all phenomena, their dependent nature, their emptiness of inherent existence. His two arms symbolize the two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth. His right hand symbolizes great method, Bodhichitta and so forth, while his left hand symbolizes great wisdom. His right hand rests on his right knee and touches the earth. Showing Shakimuni Buddha's power to stop all negativities, especially the suffering of all of the three lower realms. His left hand rests in his lap in the mudra of concentration. And supports a bowl of nectar. The nectar that destroys all delusions and especially all disease. His body is brilliant golden coloured, light-natured like a rainbow. He appears as a monk wearing the three Dharma robes. Symbolizing his pure ethics. He is adorned with the 32 major signs and 80 minor marks of a Buddha. He is seated in the Vajra position. And emanates countless rays of golden light in all directions, extending out to the far limits of space. Stabilize on this visualization for a short time. Especially on the sense that the enlightened being Shakimini Buddha is actually appearing in the space before you. In the nature of great love, great compassion, boundless wisdom. Then, to practice the four opponent powers, we first meditate using the power of the object. So visualizing surrounding us in all directions, the numberless mass of living beings appearing in human forms. Recognizing that just like us, every one of these living beings vividly, personally experiences the faults of psychic existence. Sickness, short life, disappointment, fear, so recognizing our kinship with all of these numberless living beings, we make the request to Shakimini Buddha, seated in front. You are the Buddha jewel. You are the Dharma jewel. You are the Sangha jewel. And you are our protector. From this moment until we all attain enlightenment, we take refuge in you. Through your great compassion, please rescue all sentient beings without exception from negativities of body, speech and mind. From the two obscurations and from the suffering of lower rebirths. Please ripen the Buddha potential of all living beings so we quickly attain enlightenment. This is the power of the object. Then we practice the second power, the power of regret. Acknowledging all the harmful actions we have engaged in the past. For body, speech or mind. Because of our anger, because of our selfish attachment, because of our confusion, recognizing that we ourselves experience the consequences of these actions. And that they have caused suffering for others. We develop strong regret. Not the mind of guilt or shame. Simply regretting the consequences we have created for ourselves and others. Through harmful actions of body, speech or mind. Then we practice the third power, the power of the opponent force. Through the meditation, again requesting Shakimini Buddha. You are Buddha jewel. You are Dharma jewel. You are Sangha jewel. And you are our protector. Through your great compassion, please purify myself and all living beings from negativities of body, speech and mind. In response to our request, from Shakimini Buddha's heart, pure, radiant, white light and nectar emanate, coming down, dissolving into oneself and all living beings. And as this pervades us, we feel that all our negative actions of body, speech and mind are completely purified. Finally, we can practice the fourth power, the power of commitment. We can make a commitment to ourselves. So if there's a particular type of harmful action, harmful speech, harmful mental pattern that we have, We can make a commitment to do our best to avoid that for a period that we know we can maintain, even if it's an hour, a day, or a week. We can then visualize that Shakimini Buddha becomes smaller and smaller, condensing into a brilliant drop of light that comes to the crown of our head. Dissolves into us and descends to our heart. We can feel that Shakimuni Buddha's body and our body are non-dual. Shakimuni Buddha's enlightened speech and our own speech are non-dual. Shakimuni Buddha's enlightened mind and our own mind are non-dual. And we can release our attention and finish the meditation. Four opponent powers is a really useful meditation to do regularly. So if we're able to do it, say, once a week, it becomes more meaningful, particularly because there will almost always be some things where we haven't behaved the way that we ideally would have behaved in the last week, and so we can make this meditation feel more realistic and more relevant to ourselves by reflecting on those. And this way, if we do that, then continuously we're using these types of meditation to actually firstly to cultivate more mindfulness of our actions of body, speech and mind, but also to be continuously setting a habit of changing them in a positive way. And of course we can do the meditation on the four opponent powers in a variety of different ways. So on this occasion, that's an example of combining it with Shakimini Buddha meditation, but of course we can adapt it in whatever way we would like to ourselves. So we're going through the medium scope teachings that Geshe sets out in part 4 of Path of Enlightenment. And as we've talked about before, the main focus of these is the Four Noble Truths. So very briefly, the Four Noble Truths firstly cover true sufferings, or why it is that any experience of psychic existence will ultimately be unsatisfactory. The second true cause. So why is that? Why is it that we have the types of experience as beings in psychic existence that we do? Where is that coming from? It's possible, if we could understand where it's coming from, then by changing those causes, by identifying the causes and changing those causes, in principle, it should be possible to change the result. That is, it should be possible to eliminate the experience of suffering within psychic existence. That's the third truth, true cessation. In principle, it's possible. It's possible to eliminate all suffering completely by eliminating the cause of suffering. So how would we actually do that? How would we go about removing the causes of suffering and experiencing the cessation of suffering by using the methods of training our body, speech and mind, but in particular of training our mind? And that's the fourth truth of true paths. So at the beginning of the last term, we talked a lot about the fact that the first noble truth in particular is emphasized, and it was the very first thing that the Buddha taught after arising from the Bodhi tree and going to Sarnath, where he taught the Four Noble Truths. And but we made the point that although the Buddha put such emphasis on suffering, that the only point of doing that is to eliminate it. Or to put it another way, if we really think about it, the first noble truth, although it was the one that Buddha taught first, in a way is secondary, because he taught that only for the purpose of enabling us to find the way to remove suffering. So from that point of view, it's the third noble truth rather than the first that's really the main game. The point, as we talked about, of putting so much emphasis on the first noble truth, of understanding the nature of psychic existence, the nature of the various types of suffering that we experience as living beings, is that is what motivates us to eliminate it. And again, we went through the example of COVID-19. So until anybody realised that there was such a thing as COVID-19, then it wasn't possible to do anything about it. Once it had been identified as something that was different from anything that had been seen before, then it was possible to begin to figure out what the causes of it were, and by understanding those causes, to do something about it. So it's like that. We need to understand the first noble truth. We need to understand what our situation is actually like in psychic existence in order to be really motivated to do something about it. So I've gone through a few times where this fits in the outline in the Path to Enlightenment. So I won't go into that in so much detail today, except to say that this section that we're going through at the moment, it's within a subsection that's referred to as contemplating suffering in order to see the disadvantages of psychic existence. So it's kind of what I just said. It's actually what's promoting us to understand what our situation is like, so that we can see its disadvantages and we're inclined to do something about it. And within that, there are further two divisions, the second of which actually goes through the various ways in which psychic existence is unsatisfactory. And that in turn has two parts. So the first is the general sufferings of psychic existence, the general faults, and the second is the specific sufferings of psychic existence. And what that division is about, so the general sufferings really refers to the types of experience that at least any human being is going to come across in one form or another. So it's common to living beings generally, but particularly to human beings. Whereas the specific sufferings of psychic existence refer to various types of suffering that are particular to certain types of rebirth. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that today. So the general sufferings of psychic existence, Geshe-la's explanation of that begins on 393 of Path to Enlightenment. And that's grouped into 3 different sets of explanation. So firstly, there's an explanation of 8 different types of suffering experience. Secondly, a presentation of 6 different types, and then finally a presentation of 3 different types. And these are really just different ways of thinking about the same thing. They're not inconsistent, they're not contradictory. And we talked about why these different types of classification exist. So why don't we just look at one of them? Wouldn't that be enough? The point of it is that by thinking of reflecting on our experience in psychic existence in all of these different ways, using all of these different approaches, bringing up all of these different angles on it, helps us to understand it more thoroughly and apply it to our own situation. If we become really, really familiar with thinking about our own experience day to day in terms of the 8 types of experience, the 6 types of experience, and most subtly, the 3 types of experience, it means that we start to reprogram our own interpretation of what's happening to us and what we can do about it. So as with all of the practices of the path to enlightenment, the idea is that we use our wisdoms of listening, thinking, and meditation to really, really internalize this understanding, not for the purpose of gaining intellectual knowledge, because it's useful to be a knowledgeable Buddhist, but in order to enable this to affect our own framework of relating to the world and to our experience. So we've covered off on the 8 sufferings. In the last session before the break, we began on the 6, and of the 6, we've done the first 4. So I'll just mention the first 4. They are the experience of uncertainty, of dissatisfaction, of losing our body repeatedly from life to life, of being reborn again in with a true birth, and then we'll begin the explanation, Geshe's explanation, with the 5th, which is constant change of status. So this explanation begins on page 405 of Path to Enlightenment. So again, as with all of these things, it's really useful. It's only useful actually if we relate it to our own experience. So if we're talking about change of status, for most of us, our roles in life have some sort of status. So it can be status within our friendship group, within our family, within our workplace, within society generally. And those roles or that status that we have tend to form part of our identity. And it's easy, because of that, to derive some sort of personal sense of security or self-worth from the various types of status that we have. So we can derive security, a sense of self-worth, from how popular we are, from the skills that we feel that we have, from our job. So both the fact that we might be really good in our job, or others might recognise that we're good in our job, or that we might have a job that's regarded as high status. It might be the fact that we hold some sort of position that people regard as valuable, that people look up to us, and that they respect our opinion, they want to know what we think about things. It might be because we have a lot of wealth, and so we're influential. All of those things, all of those components of our status, definitely they are impermanent. That's because all of those things are products, and anything that is a product, anything that is produced by causes, is necessarily impermanent. It can't retain its current state indefinitely. Once the powers that produce that product, or once the causes that produce that product have extinguished their power to go on sustaining it, then things will change. So this is a problem if our identity and self-worth is very, very strongly integrated with our status in some way, because we are definitely going to lose our status in whatever form that takes. And at some point it will definitely change. So Geshe quotes at the beginning of this section a verse in the Transmission of the Vinaya, which is about the 4 limits of impermanence. So collection ends in dispersal, rising ends in falling, meeting ends in separation, and birth ends in death. So particularly the second one here, rising ends in falling, is a teaching on the fact that whatever status we have is definitely going to change at some point. And these types of changes in our status and reputation can happen in the space of an instant. So we can easily see today that many people who are celebrities, people who are aspiring for political office, there's often a very common occurrence where somebody unearths a tweet or a comment that somebody made on social media 5 years ago, and all of a sudden this stellar career is ended in the space of a day. Up until the 21st of May this year, Scott Morrison was probably the most powerful person in this country. So everything that he said would be reported on and analysed with a fine-tooth comb by our media. If he posted a photo of a curry on Facebook, then again analysis would go into overdrive about what he was doing and why he was doing it. People all over the place were talking about him. He was in the front pages of newspapers every day. Now, just a couple of months later, he's just a backbencher. If he posts a photo of a curry on Facebook these days, nobody is really interested. Journalists aren't beating a path to his door every day. In the space of 24 hours, his status completely changed. So it's like that for all of us. If our status is built, or if our status is something that is a foundation of our identity or of a sense of our self-worth, and for most of it is to some degree, then the foundations of that are fragile. And when our status changes, that can often cause great distress. So this constant up and down, this change in status, the change in the way we see ourselves, the way others see us, is one of the inevitable features of psychic existence. The sixth fault is the fault of loneliness. And what loneliness is mainly talking about here is the fact that our own personal experience of psychic existence is individual. Nobody else goes through our own experiences or can really live our experiences from the inside other than we ourselves. So again, it doesn't matter how many friends we have. It doesn't matter how big and warm and embracing our extended family is. It doesn't matter how many Instagram followers we have. Ultimately, each one of us goes through our own experience from the beginning of this life until the end of this life alone and individually. If we have any type of unpleasant experience, even if it's a really minor one, like a head cold, nobody else can take on that experience or suffering for us. However much, however deeply and sincerely they might want to do that, nobody can take away our own suffering from us. And of course, for the even deeper sufferings in our life, for example, losing somebody who is really close to us, again, we might have such a deep, profound feeling that we could help somebody who's going through deep grief and separation and so forth. And our friends and family, people who care about us, can be incredible support in those times. They can be a source of sympathy and kindness and so forth, and that can certainly help us, but ultimately they can't change or profoundly or take away the type of experience that we have. When we come to this world, we come alone, and when we leave it, we also leave alone. Leave it alone. And nobody whatsoever, however much they wish, is able to share that experience with us. Nobody can do anything about it. So this is the sixth example of the suffering experience of psychic existence. The third set are the three sufferings, and Geshe-la's explanation begins on page 407 of Path to Enlightenment. So this explanation is a lot more general and high level. So it experiences all of the types of suffering that we've covered in the explanations of the 8 and the 6. It's particularly interesting though because it also includes things that we don't immediately, or that wouldn't immediately recognise as suffering. And that's important because that really gets to the way in which psychic existence is ultimately unsatisfactory. That we're not just talking about things that are obviously unpleasant. When we're talking about the First Noble Truth, certainly it includes those things, but the really difficult thing about psychic existence is that its unsatisfactory nature pervades every type of experience, even ones that aren't manifestly what we would think of as suffering ordinarily. So these three are the suffering of pain, changing suffering, and pervasive suffering. So the suffering of pain is really the closest to suffering as we would already think about it. So it's basically experiences that suck. Anything that we think, I really don't like that. All of the things that are covered in the 8 and the 6 are included in the suffering of pain. Anything that is painful for us, anything that's comfortable, that's uncomfortable, that's unpleasant, that's irritating, anything that we basically prefer not to experience. And as Geshe says on page 407, this type of suffering is manifest, so it's really easy to identify. We know when we're going through an experience that sucks. The second type of experience is changing suffering, and this is a lot more subtle. And we don't always identify this type of experience as having a suffering nature, because our idea of suffering is more like that we are talking about things that are really unpleasant, things that suck. So changing suffering is talking about the fact that we do experience things as pleasant. We do have times where we feel happy, where our mind is up. Often we only have that experience because they involve a change from something that was a previous suffering experience. So often experiences that we label as pleasant or happy, what we're really labeling is the fact that a previous type of suffering experience has come to an end. So Geshe gives the example of lying on the beach, again, which is something we can relate to at the moment in Melbourne in midwinter. So right now the idea of being anywhere other than Melbourne and of going and lying on a beach in somewhere warm and beautiful seems like heaven. But suppose we do that. So suppose we escape the winter in Melbourne and we find ourselves in Bali or far north Queensland, and we get out to the beach and stretch out under the beautiful warm sun, and it feels absolutely fantastic to be done with the winter in Melbourne and to be lying out there in the sun. We know though that it's definitely not going to go on feeling great forever and ever indefinitely. If we lie out there in the sun, after a certain period of time, we're going to start getting uncomfortably warm. So this beautiful, wonderful experience that we fantasized about and that we spent a whole lot of money and leave from work to get to, after a certain period of time, this experience that we've craved actually turns into something that feels uncomfortable after a relatively short period of time. So we're feeling too warm, we decide to go up and jump into water, and jumping into water relieves the discomfort we had of feeling too hot from lying in the sun for too long. But again, it's not going to start feeling great, or it's not going to keep feeling great indefinitely. After a while, we're going to start feeling too cold in the water. Or if we don't feel too cold, we're going to start feeling bored. So it might be nice to jump in the water and spend 10 minutes or half an hour in there, but we're not going to we're not going to want to spend 5 hours or 15 hours or 25 hours hanging out in the water. So after a while we get tired of this experience. It's no longer giving us enjoyment or satisfaction. So we get up out of the water and we go back and lie on the beach again, stretch out and think, oh, isn't this warm sun fantastic? So continuously we go through this cycle of exchanging one type of experience for another. And while we can certainly experience happiness and enjoyment for certain periods of time, it's not possible to sustain that experience indefinitely, because those experiences are impermanent, the causes of them are impermanent, and so they are definitely going to change. If being on the beach in Bali, if that actually by its very nature, that was the cause of happiness, so if that was absolutely essentially its nature, well then it would always continuously bring us happiness. Wouldn't matter how long we did it, because by its very nature it would be the cause of happiness. It would always bring us satisfaction. The fact that it doesn't, the fact that it can only sustain a satisfaction and enjoyment for a certain period of time, shows that its actual nature is not that of happiness. So for this reason, so if we understand changing suffering, we're really starting to get a sense of why nothing whatsoever in cyclic existence can ultimately bring us reliable or sustainable satisfaction. Doesn't matter how long we try or where we look. The third type of suffering is pervasive suffering. So Geshe explains this briefly on page 408. And of all of the types of suffering that are explained, this is the one that's the most subtle and so requires the most effort to understand it. So it refers to the fact that while we are in cyclic existence, which means, as we recall, while we have aggregates or while we have a body and mind that is conditioned by delusion and karma, our experience will always be at some level a form of suffering. The other types of suffering are quite easy to understand. So certainly the suffering of pain we know about, the suffering of change, through analysis we can get that. Pervasive suffering is something that it's much more difficult to discern and that requires deeper and more sustained reflection on our experience in order to really understand it. But it's important too, because Geshe makes the point that if we want to develop the mind of renunciation, understanding the other types of suffering are just like stepping stones to that. To really get it, then we need to have this understanding of pervasive suffering. In the Great Exposition, Jetsun Tsongkhapa, he gives a little bit more of an explanation of this, or of an aspect of this, and one of the ways he talks about it is the fact that we all have the tendencies, we all have the potential to experience suffering at any time. So they might not be manifest in the moment, but if we have the potentials to experience suffering, well then we don't know at what point causes are going to come up that are going to trigger that into the ultimate, into the actual experience of suffering. So for example, we might be sitting around in the weekend in a coffee shop, everything's great, we're feeling really happy and satisfied and enjoying the weekend, and then we happen to see somebody that we really, really don't like. So it could be our ex, for example. So supposing we've got an ex and we've got a very things ended really, really badly. We haven't seen our ex for years, and all of a sudden they heave into view while we're sitting enjoying ourselves in this coffee shop. Instantly our experience changes, because we have this potential to experience suffering that's just sitting there latent on our mental continuum, and it only needs the right conditions to come along in order to trigger that averse experience. And furthermore, we don't have any control over what situations are going to come along and trigger the potentials that we have at any time. So again, I've found that explanation from Jetsun Tsongkhapa a very useful way of trying to understand what this is getting at, that we have these potentials and that our ability, firstly, we can't do anything in the moment about the fact that we have those potentials, and we also can't really, we have limited ability to control the things that are going to trigger that into suffering at any time. Okay, so that's the general sufferings of psychic existence. Then on page 408, Geshe begins with the explanation of the specific sufferings of psychic existence. So as I said before, these are types of experience that are particular to certain types of rebirth state. And these are presented in terms of the various, of the 6 rebirth states in psychic existence. So the first 3 of these, the suffering of the lower realms, and these have already previously been explained in the small scope section of the text, so Geshe doesn't go into a detailed, or doesn't go into detailed re-explanation of those here. Fourthly, the suffering of humans, and they've been covered already in the explanation of the suffering of the 8 and the 6 and the 3. And so here Geshe just rounds out the explanation by talking about the types of suffering that beings of the highest realms of psychic existence undergo. So those are the demigods and the gods. And again, this is a useful explanation because it enables us to disconnect the idea of positive external conditions with the experience of suffering. So when we're talking about the suffering of what are referred, the English translation is of demigods or gods, we're talking about states of psychic existence where beings have much better external conditions than we do. So if we think about it, our current experience as human beings, if somebody landed here from 300 years ago, they would kind of think that our existence was a bit like gods or demigods, because from the point of view of our diets, our shelter, the medical health that's available, our possessions and so forth, anybody would look at us and think that we had an inconceivably fortunate state of rebirth. So we can think about the beings in the demigods or god realms as beings who might be, say, 4 or 5 centuries advanced from us. That might be an analogy that would enable us to explain or to think about these types of states of existence. So Geshe first talks about, first he gives a little bit of an explanation of these 6 realms. So we talked about the 3 lower realms and those being 3 lower realms within the desire realm. So backing up from the cosmology at the time when the Buddha was teaching, the idea of the various world systems was that there were 3 major realms in psychic existence: the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. The desire realm is called that because the main characteristic of beings in the desire realm is that they have very strong desires. So it includes both the human realm and also the lower realms and the realms of gods and demigods. Also, as well as the desire realm, we have the form and formless realms. And again, these are thought of mainly in terms of higher rebirths, although it's possible for living beings, for human beings that have experienced, that cultivate deep states of concentration, to also have the experiences of the form and formless realms. So Geshe's explanation of demigods begins on page 409, and he explains firstly that their general conditions are much better than we as human beings currently enjoy. So they have more wealth, they have more enjoyment, they have longer lifespan, stronger powers, and so forth. But their conditions aren't as favourable as those of beings in the very highest realm, that is the Deva realm or the God realm. So for the beings in the demigod realm, this is a problem. So they perceive the conditions of those in the higher realms, and to that, that's like a curse. That's something, although they have extraordinary external conditions themselves, they're very strong, that they're dissatisfied because they're able to perceive that there is another group of beings, another realm where beings have much better conditions that they do. And this gives rise to great satisfaction and great dissatisfaction, and it means that even though they have extraordinarily positive physical conditions, they can't extract any enjoyment of them. Mainly they're motivated by a wish, a drive to experience the same types of pleasures and conditions that the gods do. Geshe says that this attachment to status is so strong that it means that these living beings have no possibility of realizing emptiness. And from that point of view, you could say that their conditions are less favourable than that of human beings, because at least human beings have a possibility of being able to realise emptiness. The demigods are also less powerful than the gods, and so therefore the gods can move in and take whatever they want from them. This makes the demigods very unhappy and very envious and jealous, and so they're continuously motivated to go to war against the beings of the Deva realm. But they can never actually be successful in that. It's a completely hopeless exercise because they have much less power than living beings within the Deva realm. So therefore, although they have these extraordinary, fortunate, positive, beautiful external conditions, they have no ability to enjoy them because their experience is dominated by this continuous agitation, jealousy, and aggression towards those who have better conditions than they do. So again, even if we don't relate to this, if we don't relate to this cosmology literally, if we choose not to, we can also relate to this in terms of experiences that human beings in the human realm have. Human beings who have great conditions, but who simply can't be satisfied with them, who aspire to acquire more and more wealth, who are motivated to always do better than others, who are motivated by competitiveness and so forth. The suffering of the gods, Geshe begins the explanation on page 410. So again, living beings within the desire God, within the God realm, within the desire realm, compared to us, have absolutely extraordinary pleasure and extraordinary enjoyment, and also extraordinary long lives. So their life isn't completely free of any type of unpleasant experience. So, for example, the demigods attempt to fight them from time to time, but unsuccessfully. And also Geshe says that individual devas differ in their own level of attractiveness and power. And if one deva is less attractive, has less power, less wealth than another, then that comparison means that they can become unhappy about that. The main characteristic of desire realm gods is that they become completely absorbed in the experience of pleasure and in seeking more and more refined pleasures, and because of this, they're continuously reinforcing their attachment. These extraordinary, wonderful and fortunate physical conditions that they have are a result of their previous karma. So particularly for previous karma of great generosity. But this karma will eventually be exhausted, particularly because it's not being renewed, because living beings in the Deva realm don't see any need to engage in actions of generosity themselves. They don't see any need to engage in, certainly in meditation or spiritual practice. And one reason for that is that they can't perceive any suffering themselves. The suffering within the Deva realm is minimal. So for us living beings in the human realm, we know from our own experience we know from looking at beings around us that suffering actually exists, and that can be a motivator to practice. Whereas for beings in the Deva realm, because suffering is so scarce, that they really have very, very little motivation to practice. Because of this means that ultimately they exhaust their karma. So although they have extraordinarily long lives, that ultimately this source of merit runs out. And when that does, the Deva realm's life comes to an the Deva's life comes to an end. Geshe also explains that when gods experience the signs of their death, that is something that causes them to become very fearful. So some texts actually say that the experience of a Deva who suddenly becomes aware of the mortality and of the fact that they are going to die, and also the fact that they can perceive where they're going to be reborn, that is the greatest and most profound suffering of psychic existence. It causes such distress to them to see what they currently have and what they're losing relative to what their the next rebirth is going to be like. And so therefore, the time when a Deva recognises they're going to die is one of rejection, because other Devas don't want anything to do with them, because it reminds them of their own mortality, and also of great fear. Again, we could relate to this type of experience from the point of view of some human beings. So some human beings have unbelievable wealth, more than they could possibly experience in their own lives. They don't have any of the worries that we ordinary living beings do, but even with the greatest amount of wealth, the greatest amount of power or influence, they can't buy their way out of psychic existence. When their karmic cause is exhausted for that life, well then that experience will cease. So Geshe finishes this explanation by also talking about the sufferings of the gods of the form realms and the formless realms. So these are different from the gods of the desire realms. Effectively, these gods exist in a state that's similar to continuous meditative bliss, and they do that for enormously long periods, so for eons and eons and eons, because of the extraordinary merit that they've created in their previous lives. So they remain in a state that's similar to continuous blissful meditation, and for the duration of their hugely long lives, they never have any experience that we would experience suffering. But they're not free of psychic existence, because they do still have the pervasive suffering of having aggregates that are bound by delusion and karma, which means that when their experience in their current realm ends, that their potential to experience suffering once again will be re-enlivened. So one example that Jadson Somkapa gives about this, he says that their existence, is absolutely extraordinary, absolutely blissful, but it's a bit like a bird that's flying into the highest reaches of the sky. It's not possible for that bird to remain in the highest parts of the sky forever. Eventually, it's got to come down. Or another example he gives is, it's like you shoot an arrow into the sky, and for a while it ascends, perhaps hundreds and hundreds of feet into the sky, but eventually it turns and descends to the ground, and that's what the experience of these formless realm gods is like. Okay, so we'll wind up there. What we'll do next time is just cover Geshe-la's brief summation of the First Noble Truth, which is at the end of page 413 and on to 414, and then we'll begin with the Second Noble Truth, which is covered in chapter 14 of Path of Enlightenment next week. So we'll finish with the prayers. So I'll do the final prayer of the graduated path on page 31 in English only. By the two collections, vast as space, amassed with effort for a long time, May I become a chief of conquerors, a guide for all beings whose mind's eye is blinded by ignorance. Also in all lives, while not yet come to that, may Manjushri favour me with his compassion. Finding the supreme path, complete with all stages of the teachings, may I please the conquerors by practising well. By my precise understanding of the essential points of the path, with skillful means drawn along by strong compassion, and by dispelling the mental darkness of beings, may I uphold the conqueror's teaching for a long time. Where the supreme precious teaching has not spread, also where it has spread but become degenerate, with a mind deeply moved by great compassion, may I make clear this treasure of benefit and bliss. The stages of the path, excellently established by the marvellous deeds of the conquerors and their sons, give glory to the minds of those aspiring for liberation. May the conqueror's deeds be long preserved. May all humans and non-humans who remove the obstructions and establish conditions favourable to cultivating the excellent path never be parted for all of their lifetimes in the purest of paths which the Buddhists have praised. When someone makes effort to practice properly the 10 points of conduct of the Supreme Vehicle, may he always be assisted by the mighty protectors, and may oceans of good fortune spread out reaching. Now I'll do the general dedication in Tibetan and English. Gewandi cheboku sonan Geshe Acharya Sonam Geshe Lejong Dambakani Tobasho. By this virtue, may all beings complete the collections of wisdom and merit, and attain the two holy bodies arisen from wisdom and merit. Jangju Sem Chogrem Bochi Mache Panam Cheruchi Chepanyamba Me Bae Gong Ne Gong Du Pel Basho. May the precious superior mind of enlightenment be generated in those who have not yet generated it, and not decrease in those who have developed it, but increase continuously. Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you particularly Marnikam, and see you next week.